So hello everyone. Hi Carmela, hi Eyal. Again, I'm terribly sorry for the disconnection. I hope now it will be better after rebooting my computer. So hopefully we'll have it. We are moving to our next panel that now is specifically going to focus on contact tracing. And first of all, I want to apologize in the name of Tehilla, Shwartz, Altshuler. We were supposed to have 4 speakers on this panel, and actually 4 panelists. And unfortunately, Tehilla won't be able to join us. I would like to start by introducing our guests. And so I'll start with Eyal. And then we'll start with the panel. Eyal Ronen. Eyal is a faculty member at Tel Aviv University School of Computer Science. His research interests are on cybersecurity and applied cryptography. And together with Professor Benny Pincus from Bar-Ilan, he designed HaShomer, a contact tracing scheme that has been tailored to the needs and cultural norms in Israel. The scheme was adopted by the Israeli Ministry of Health and released as part of the national contact tracing application Hamagen. And hopefully will give us a little bit of information about that. Carmela Troncoso, we saw her, I saw you only at the last 30 minutes, Carmela, so sorry. But she was before me, is an assistant professor at EPFL in Switzerland, where she heads the Spring Labs. Before arriving to EPFL, she was a faculty member at the IMD Software Institute in Spain and postdoctoral researcher at the COSIC group. Carmela research focuses on security and privacy, and her thesis, Design and Analysis Methods for Privacy Technologies, received the European Research Consortium for Informatics and Mathematics Security and Trust Management Best PhD Thesis Award. And last but not least, Léo Perrin. Did I say it correctly, Léo? Recently, he obtained his junior researcher position at INRIA in Paris, and he got his PhD from University of Luxembourg in 2017. His work focuses on discrete mathematics and symmetric cryptography, but he used the French lockdown to investigate Bluetooth-based contact tracing with his colleagues. He co-authored with Serge Vaudenay and many others a document in French warning about the risks posed by such a process, which gathered more than 100,000 downloads. All right, so I'm going to be the minority because if Tehilla was here, then at least I would have one person that is not coming from the CS area. I'm talking a PhD CS area. So bear with me. But I would like to go as follows. What I think of doing, because we have around an hour and 20 minutes, and let's leave another 20 minutes for questions and answer. What I think is at first, I asked the panelists to talk for 5 minutes about the topic of contact tracing. Carmela, I know that you probably say to yourself, I talked about it for 2 hours. What am I going to say another 5 minutes? But just as a kind of an opening remarks, and then we'll start with questions and answers to the panelists. And again, it's a weird kind of situation to be in a webinar, but feel free to talk with each other rather to have a kind of a question answer kind of process. All right, so Eyal, maybe you want to start.
Yes, I will try to share my screen. Because there is a very short, hopefully, presentation. Can you see it? Does it look good? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So, as you mentioned before, I was one of the designers of the contact tracing scheme that was adopted in Israel, and I want to shortly talk about it. And mainly what I want to talk is what I think is the different trade-offs that we need to make on privacy-preserving solutions in general, and the fact that one size does not fit all, and sometimes you need to tailor it for specific needs for specific populations. And I will make some disclaimers. I'm a CS person, I'm a cryptographer. I'm not a medical doctor. I have no expertise in social science, and I do not represent the Israeli Ministry of Health or any other organization. And however, I'm not going to talk about crypto. I will talk about things that I actually do not know anything about. I will talk about cultural norms and the impact of privacy preserving solutions on different populations, about the public relations, and if we have time, a bit about high-tech giants versus governments. And the main takeaways, and after it you can maybe stop listening to me, is that I believe at least that contact tracing is a trade-off between utility and security sometimes and privacy. And the optimal trade-off is not a universal truth that fits all of the different nations, states, or cultures, but actually different cultures have different norms and priorities that we need to tailor our solutions to them. And that if I can quote Lord Chief Justice Howard, then privacy should not only be done, but should be manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done. We need to actually prove to people that if we prepare some optimal and great scheme, if you can't really explain it to the general population, to the users, we haven't done anything. And unfortunately, at least for me, my audience, if I want to explain it, is usually not CS professors, but general public, and sometimes even lawyers and other such adversarial clients. And in Israel, I think you already talked about it, but Israel started with manual contact tracing in the beginning, and I'm not sure that we did a really good job at it. Currently, we have something in the area of one epidemiological investigator per about 3,000 people. Hopefully more will come soon. Currently, we have about 3,000 new cases each day, and a very small percentage of the COVID-19 positive persons are interrogated. So manual contact tracing simply doesn't work for us. And in the interrogation that we do have, and it's something that is currently the norm, people are asked about non-contacts, and they ask about public locations and the exact times when they've been. For example, if I am identified as a COVID-19 positive, they might ask me, where have you been? And I will tell them, I was in a supermarket in specific hours. And this is something that's going to be published to the general population, sometimes in newspapers, now in website and general and dedicated Telegram channels. And basically, we're going to broadcast to the entire population that on a specific supermarket, on a specific time, a COVID-19 positive person was there. And this is something that of course, has great impacts on the privacy of the COVID-19 positive persons. But it's something that I feel that in Israel is pretty much the consensus right now, that this is something that we are willing to sacrifice. And the current status, as I already talked, this is not a very updated presentation, but basically we have the automatic tool that Karine talked about, the Shin Bet, and we don't think it's something that works very well, but we do understand that it have very bad impacts on privacy for the general population. And so now we want to see what we want to do in privacy versus utility. And what I want to claim is that a huge difference between different countries. There's of course, and it's obvious to see difference between the solutions that were made in countries in East Asia versus what we have in the Western world. But also, at least if we want to consider Israel as part of the Western world, there are differences. And I target Switzerland simply because this is the home of the district PT where it started from. And want to claim that there are differences between Switzerland and Israel. It might be a little bit stereotypic, but as we understand from a talk with the people from district PT, privacy in people for Switzerland is the utmost importance. And it's something that they hold dearly. And on the other hand, people are more compliant, and I assume they have more trust in the government than we currently have in Israel. However, here in Israel, people like as a national hobby to challenge the system. We have this history of the Shin Bet erroneous quarantine notification. People to blindly trust any exposure reports, doesn't matter where it comes from. And many people will try to hack the system for different reasons. Now, the district PT, and this is what Google Apple also adopted, does the maximum effort to protect the identity of COVID-19 positive persons. And for example, the system is going only to notify people on a day or a very large time interval on the exposure. You're not going to get the exact time and location. And in Israel, the location, the public location at least of COVID-19 positive persons are published in the news. Something that's done all the time. And what we assume from this TPT is that the explainability in Switzerland is not that important. People are assumed to trust the system, and therefore, if they will get this notification that were exposed on Monday, for example, they are going to self-quarantine. However, in Israel, I believe at least that in current situation, people will not believe the system unless they are absolutely convinced that the exposure notification was actually true. And therefore, if you want people to actually follow these notifications, we need to provide them, for example, the exact time, even at least cost, grain, location information about their exposure. So say, yes, they notify that I was exposed at this time. I remember, or I see on my device that I was indeed in a public supermarket at this time, and it sounds logical to me. And there are other issues that are very relevant in Israel. As we say, I at least believe, and some other people, that relay attacks such as was described by Serge earlier today are more relevant in Israel. There's a very good chance that something like this will be done, even as a prank. People might claim that they were exposed to COVID-19 to gain something like students want to go, they not to go to exam, and people don't trust the system are going to cheat. And again, there's the whole notion of the Haredim and other populations that do not have smartphones and can only get location information that requires GPS information for backward compatibility with older versions of Amagen, which was used to notify people on GPS location. And what we currently have, I'll skip it for a bit because it was too far, but as Karine said, we have the Amagen 2, we have the everything implemented without Google API, and basically, technically, it might work in some way, but overall, it's a failure. The public does not install the app, at least not in large numbers. And we believe the main reasons are not technical at all. They do not relate to the cryptographic design or anything else. They relate to the fact that there's a very large distrust in the general public for the whole government response to COVID-19. And this is part of the government response, and people say, we don't believe it, that it's going to work. And the solution was not actually explained to the public. The PR was very bad. And actually, we worked very hard to give a privacy-preserving decentralized solution, but the populations, general population, still think this is the same thing as the Shin Bet tool. This is another form of mass surveillance. So they don't want to download it again because they already have the Shin Bet tool. Another short example, if I have the time, is that due to the fact of that we don't know if those tools are working or not, we wanted to find a way to give some information, some telemetry about the application usage to the Ministry of Health, to try to help them to improve the help and to see if this can actually be an alternative to the Secret Service or Shin Bet tool. And Benny suggested to use a multi-party computation solution based on a work called PRIO from Stanford, which is actually used currently by Firefox for telemetry. And it has very nice properties. It just allows the Ministry of Health to learn aggregated statistics and not invade the privacy of any individual users using an outside server. And with the technical people in the Ministry of Health really liked it. However, we needed an approval of the Ministry of Health legal department. And both me and Benny completely failed to convey the CS and cryptography notions of distributed trust. The lawyers actually vetoed this solution because they say they're not going to allow for any server to handle a user's data outside of the Ministry of Health. And what they say is the lawyer's solution. We're going to say that we preserve privacy. We're going to declare it, so it should be enough. We believe the public won't buy it. This is another part of the problem if we want to try to give such solutions. If we couldn't convince the lawyers in the Ministry of Health, I'm not sure that we will be able to convince the general public. In conclusions, I feel that at least I and I think other people need to find better ways to communicate these privacy issues to the public. I think the different countries need to have different privacy norms and different solutions. And that I totally believe that Google and Apple care about users' privacy and they wanted to have a good solution. But the way that they coerced governments to use their product without any modification actually led to the usage of much worse tools in some countries, and in Israel to part of the failure of Magen 2, which actually caused Israel to continue to use the Shin Bet tool, which is much worse in any way that we can think about it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eyal. Thank you, Eyal. Carmela, would you like to give your 5-minute speech?
Yeah, I don't have any slides because I already gave you too many slides for today. So the first thing I have to say that I'm not, I was never a huge proponent of these apps. How I came to this game was because we were thrown into it, and then at that point, first of all, there was the problem that there was not even a discussion about whether there should be an app. This was not something that even entered on the discussion, and this was very wrong from the beginning. But this is something that has been happening right since the beginning of the pandemic. We know the pandemic and emergency times are times where huge changes in the balance of power happen, in which, I'm sorry about the light, but I don't know how to get to be on the screen without looking at the control.
It's okay, it's better than disconnection of voice.
That's actually true. You can hear me well. Again, do some for 2 hours. Hopefully it was better than this. So that's a first thing, right? And that I think is a big lesson that we should have for the future, because we're not ended with this pandemic, and we're not ended with people trying to techno-solve things. Our intervention, and I'm going to call quote unquote intervention, to just try to bring a bit more of privacy to this thing so that it couldn't become a huge surveillance tool, was just to limit, to mitigate the damage that this could do. But I would really like that the next time there is actually more conversations. In fact, when we were in the very beginning and we're thinking about this, we not only talked with epidemiologists, we also talked with a lot of civil society. We had full workshops where we brought civil society from all around the world, and we asked them about what is the thing that worries you, right? Can we try to, well, we're building this thing to put as many protections as possible so that it does not become the thing that destroys democracy as we like it, that destroys society, and that can actually damage others. And this worries me now moving forward, right? Because we're seeing that governments now need more things. So they need telemetry, which, yeah, some telemetry. I would actually much rather think about how we collect this elsewhere in the system than actually just going to put more telemetry because we can, because isn't that cool? And I love prior, don't get me wrong, but you know, we should think a gazillion times about what is, even if we get aggregates, what does that mean? And what capabilities of control is going to that give to the government on populations and on knowledge, right? Because prior is not an anonymity tool. It's actually an aggregation tool. So it is very nice, but you know, I really would love to have a discussion about this, not with Google and Apple and not with the government, but actually with civil society as well, about what is coming. Is this something that we really want to afford? And with this also goes to the epidemiological utility, right? We're not discussing this here because we're not epidemiologists, right? We've built something. There was a lot of that in the beginning about how much utility was this going to have to understand better the pandemic. As I said in the beginning of my talk, when we build privacy technology, we have only one goal. And it is very important that we stick to the goal. And in fact, in the beginning of our design, we have an alternative thing to give data to epidemiologists. And one day through the full process, talking with our epidemiologist, and we were talking about what we could give him and how to make this privacy preserving. It was a nightmare, it was impossible. But then he said, you know, I would never give a privacy policy recommendation based on this analysis. I was like, then we're not going to give you the data, right? And then I also realized that this was also a wrong idea from the beginning. We build a thing for notify, we should build a thing for to notify. If epidemiologists want a tool to understand better the pandemic, then we can build that for them. Now, I understand that maybe we cannot have 7 apps. Well, then maybe we cannot do 7 things. We're in an emergency. We need to solve the problems that we need to solve, not, you know, create a new research area, which is great. But you know what? we're here to get out of this and hopefully next time actually go to Israel and give all of these talks in person. Then another thing that I found it very fun that Eyal compares life to Switzerland, like if this place was, I don't know, the panacea. I also find it funny that you say that all Swiss comply. The Swiss government does not believe that, by the way. But I don't think it's the case. It's also not, privacy was very important, but we still have people that believe that this tool is surveillance from the government. That's one of the main reasons why people still don't install the app. In the meantime, the government is asking, can we have more data? Because we don't see any data. It's a very funny situation in which it's unbelievable that this happens. So I don't think at the end of the day, many things are that different. And I don't think, or from my point of view, like this, on the one hand, it is true that cultural differences have to be taken into account. On the other hand, I think that pandemics are a good time for changes and educational changes. Maybe this is the time to actually, because of solidarity, take the Israelis to change a little bit in a way that then would allow us to actually put more privacy. Because if they are so used to always work on the side of transparency, which means we have surveillance because you need to see everything in order to believe, then, I mean, the ball rolls to always have surveillance because it's the only way of building things. So I don't know if that is possible in that society, but the same thing that some of the things can change, probably this can too. And then I think that I could not agree more with Eyal on the move of Google and Apple and on the how unnice it is that, yes, they took this approach, which was very, very nice, but then they also took this approach of this is the tool, right? And in fact, in my talk, I only talk about the privacy engineering side. And I also talked to you how because they decided what they decided, we need to change our process. But we also, like for using the Swiss system, we had to misuse their API. We had to find a way of reverse, of thinking about how can I use this thing that they told me is the only way to actually do what I want to do. Yeah, like you said, right? You had a design, I want to implement this design. What we did is to misuse their API. Now, for that, we had the luck in Switzerland of actually having a huge team of researchers dedicated to this. But as you say, not every country has this. Countries normally just take whatever it comes because they don't have the time or expertise or the money to even fight for this. And I just wonder how we can actually get governments to fight back against this thing. And that does not mean, oh, you know, we want to fully go against Google and Apple. But this is incredible to me, that governments just go with it. And again, it's a question of the pandemic, the urgency, the emergency. They cannot be seeing and saying no. And then, you know, and this is independent of this centralized, decentralized, is the fact that I also don't see any government, well, I see one, the Swiss government, saying, where is the code? Why are you not opening? I don't care if this is your business model. I don't care if this is Google Play services. I don't care if this Apple never opens. Where is the code? We want to see all of these things. And the same thing as we saw that the power of the people was very strong when again, we made this intervention and civil society and many others stood up to say, we don't want the surveillance system. The same has to hold now. We're in a different balance of power, right? The first one was citizen versus government. Citizens stood up, and that makes a huge impact. Now it is government versus Apple. Maybe if the community of governments stand up, something happens, right? At the end of the day, the customer is the customer. And with this, I think I'm going to stop because I have already talked more than enough.
Thank you, Carmela. Thank you. Léo.
Hi, so do you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-author of a document which was called Anonymous Tracing, a Dangerous Oxymoron. Actually, Traçage anonyme, un dangereux oxymore, since it was written originally in French. And the reason why we wrote this document is actually pretty similar, well, reminds me of what Carmela just said. There was this idea in March that was in the air that you need to have an app. And then the question is how you build the app. And with this document, we wanted to remind everyone that actually, regardless of your approach, you're going to have some potential problems, not just from a cybersecurity point of view, but more generally for society as a whole. And so we wrote this document, which was intended to be read by everyone. It was not a scientific paper. It was vulgarization, outreach. And it was quite successful in France. Then we translated it to English, and it didn't work nearly as well, but it also arrived a bit later. One thing we need to remember is, again, so this time referring to Carmela's talk, she had this very nice slide where you had this puzzle, and the protocol was just a small piece in it. And I think that's a good reminder that as much as we like to discuss the specifics of adversarial models, etc., the protocol is just a small piece of the app, and the app itself is just a small piece of the whole ecosystem that is supposed to help us fight the pandemic. And that while the risks are related to cybersecurity, so at the protocol level, etc., it's not the only ones. You also have the risks of discrimination that Serge talked about, if you are an app user or not. You have the risks related to false positives. You have to find the right balance between the number of false positives and still allowing yourselves to actually catch dangerous contacts. And one thing which really worries me is the false sense of security it might give. So these days in Zurich, apparently in some bars, you can remove a mask if you have the app. I know that it's something that some club owners wanted to do in France, that they wanted to be allowed to reopen if people would install Stop COVID, so the French tracing app. And as far as I know, they were basically told to no, not do that. But I think this is a symptom of a broader issue we have these days, which is that these apps and science is viewed just as magic. And if I have an app which is intended to protect people from COVID, then I'm protected from COVID actually. Like if someone is spitting COVID in my face, then I will be protected because I have the app. I'm in no way pretending that app designers believe any of this. I know they are far better than this, but there are far more users than there are designers. And so the message we wanted to spread with this document that we wrote, and we wanted to spread far beyond just academia, was that Bluetooth-based contact tracing is not harmless. Regardless of your approach, you will have some privacy issues, and not just privacy issues. Sure, the magnitude of them will depend on your technological choices, but you will have potential problems. And it was important to us to explain this in an article that was intended for everyone, because we believe that it is indeed a debate that we need to have at the society level. It's not just scientists ourselves, really, who need to have these debates. It's society at large. So, yeah, that's the reason why we wrote this document, and that's how we got involved with contact tracing, because it's normally not what I do. And yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm happy that people are telling me and giving me a nudge that I'm now everybody can hear me without an interference. So hello everybody. I will start my talk again for an hour. No, don't worry. So let me start, because I'm the only social scientist here, the only information scientist here. I feel kind of like lucky that I can kind of probe you into different questions regarding what you said. I want to start with asking actually a more technological, socio-technological kind of question. And Carmela, I hear you, and I totally with you regarding that is not only one solution, especially the apps cannot give us the big solution. But I want to come from the other direction. What do you think? Is there any evidence that such applications can have actually an impact that is not negligible? So now I'm going to the other side of the fence. Let's take it from the other side. Can we really say something intelligent about having those application and findings an impact that is less than negligible? Carmela, you'll be the devil advocate this time.
Well, what I can say is that the numbers that we have do say that they do break infection chains. As I said in my talk, we cannot say yet how much and how big. I also don't think we will ever be able, right, if we now enter from a social science ethical, to say is one life enough or is not enough. Then we need to be able to also measure the balance, which I also don't think we're ready to measure, going back to what Léo was saying right now, like the other impact it has. And the broader issue, and I have to say again, it goes back to many, many things that we live in nowadays, is the fact that the economy and saving the economy is behind a lot of the decisions that is being made, right? Like the bars they want to open. And it's half economy, half social. I come from Spain where people really need to go to the bar to, you know, be happy humans.
I call it political considerations.
Yeah, yeah. So that is something that also goes there, and I agree with the full security of the app. And on that, I don't think that any government has had a very successful communication about what the app does and cannot do. And I cannot point my finger on what, if it's a technological thing or if it's that still we don't know yet. What it is doing. So also looking at the negative side, because you just said to do good, and I agree with Leo that we need to be able to say how much good for how much bad, because as I said, we're not really going to be able to really say how much good. So the discrimination, that's also very important. And one thing that we got in the beginning, so we got the Swiss to change the law to have a specific epidemiological law which says that you cannot do discrimination based on positive use of the app, meaning that you cannot mandate that people use the app to come into your thing. Now, what I did not foresee at all is that the problem is the other way around. There are many bosses, the many employers that are actually asking their people to not have the app, so that they do not get notifications, so that they do not go on quarantine. And I go back to the political reasons, if you wish, why people don't want to go into quarantine. And we'll go back to all of this. And there are a lot of these effects. And then you are maybe not protecting those people, because if they don't use it at work and then they use it at home, right? We have a lot of things that we still need to figure out.
So I want to be provocative. You're saying it's not the problem of the technology. The technology works well. It can be, you know, with high impact on the pandemic. It's about the people.
No, I didn't mean to say that.
I said I'm going to be provocative.
No, I didn't mean to say that at all. You asked, like, what are the things we have that evidence? That is what it does. And I said that all of the things that go surrounding, which are the things, because the technology itself, the only thing we can do is to provide notifications, and hopefully in the good way. But if we don't fix all of the rest, then the technology is good for nothing. That's what I'm trying to say, that we need to look at all of these bads and look that does it really do all of these bad things? Because if it does any of those which are not technological, then we're done.
Leo, Eyal, what do you think?
I had a talk recently with a friend of mine, and he said he doesn't want to install the app because he thinks it has some, it will drain his battery faster. And I told him that yes, any such solution is going to drain the battery and it's inconvenient. But it's the same way that we need to put mask on, and it's very inconvenient in Israel where it's very hot, but this is the way that we need to fight the COVID-19. But then I realized that he usually doesn't wear mask. And I think that everything that we can do with this application, if we could leave it all outside and convince 100% of the population to wear masks at all and do social distancing, it will help more. And I think that basically, we try to provide a tool, technological tool that can help fight the COVID, but this is something that we need to try to convince the public that this is a real issue and they need to do things in order to fight it. And this is something that's much bigger than technology or what kind of solution that we have. And basically, if we don't, I agree with Carmela, and give just another example. If there is someone that feels that if he's going to get a notification, he needs to self-isolate and he's not going to get paid for 14 days and he won't have food to bring to his family, so this is over. No app is going to help him, and he's going to, even if it's compulsive, he's going to leave his phone at home or do everything that he can, because this is what we need. And if we want to have this social solidarity, that people will help each other to fight this COVID-19, we need social solidarity. This is something that unfortunately we are lacking a bit, I think, all over the world right now.
Yeah. Well, you have something to say.
Yeah, in terms of efficiency right now, so in France, the numbers are really low for the total download rate. But since it's a centralized system, they could provide some information. And so they had about 2% of the population downloaded the app at some point. Apparently, a bunch of them then deleted it. They had 1,000 codes that were entered. So this part is like in Swiss COVID that was explained today. So when you are diagnosed, you enter the code, and then they warned 70 people. So I guess the numbers are lower than in Switzerland, but since the uptake is much smaller and the efficiency is basically quadratic in the download rate, it's not that surprising. However, these days in Paris, the app would be completely useless, not because of anything, I mean, any app, because as many of us mentioned before, the app is just a small part of a bigger ecosystem. And if you want to break the contamination chains, you need to break them fast. Like what is nice with apps in theory is that they're going to notify hopefully more people than manual contact tracers, but also much faster. But right now in Paris, the time it takes to get the result of a test is measured in days. Like 3 or 5 days to get the test result, which is too late.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's something app developers, there's nothing we technologists can do about this. It's completely out of our power. But yeah, it's something that will be a problem for apps, Bluetooth-based ones.
I'm going to jump in between the question and answers that I get, and then I'll put kind of a transplant my questions. Or I see that you have a question. Since you are part of us, do you want to turn on the camera and ask it directly? Or Dunkelman?
Can. I know that my name, I think.
Just checking.
What we saw actually during this process was a very interesting action from the cryptographic community, because suddenly, instead of having one solution, we had at least 4 projects I'm aware of. I think there are multiple. There's the Pact East Coast, Pact West Coast, DP3T. In Israel, we have them again, and we see quite a lot of other works on contact tracing. And the question is, what can we be more prepared for next time that something like that happens, where suddenly we need to do, and everybody replicated other people's work, and can we do it better?
I think that I have a part of an answer, and I think that basically, I think what was done in many of the cases, and I can speak on the way that we did our process, is that we were able to provide different cryptographic solutions, but we needed to know what problems we want to solve. And we needed to contact people like Karine from the social science and from law and other privacy advocate to try to understand what we want as a vision. If we look at it as a social, as a society, what we want to do. And this is something that for us took quite some time. And afterwards, to try to convince the government that this is the right solution to go to, this is something that also takes a lot of time. And I think that maybe getting cryptographers to talk faster to each other is the simple problem. Getting cryptographers to talk with people from law and privacy and to work together with the government to bring such solution, this is something that takes a while. And I feel that hopefully maybe we will do it both faster and better.
One of the questions here actually really falls into my question. So an anonymized Q&A is asking, masks are enforced here in other places with fines. Do we need to go that far for the apps? In fact, one of the questions that I wanted to ask, it falls really into my question, is regarding the elephant in the room. We are all talking about those apps as voluntary apps. And governments are, especially like in Israel, they were asking, would you like to have them compulsory? In some countries in Eastern Asia, you do have it compulsory. But I want to ask about Western societies. Do we need to start considering having those apps compulsory? What do we think about that?
I think that it is absolutely taboo to even think that this thing can be compulsory in the Western society. I think that to do that, first we would need to know that this was actually a solution, that was a strong solution before your question, right? We don't have vaccines time to be mandatory once we know they actually were 100%. And I'm going to put the app on equated with the vaccine, even though it's not the kind of same solution, in the time it takes to make sure that we want to make such a thing mandatory and actually useful. But I also think that given the dependence that these apps have, A, on Google and Apple, and B, on mobile phones, and the fact you have a device, like this is going to create such, if we make it mandatory, such huge technological divides and societal divides that I really think that, I mean, I personally would frontally oppose this kind of move. And I don't think, no, we need to have a better way of communicating solidarity to people, not to teach them again that the way of doing things is because it is mandatory. This is, again, we're moving into the kind of pandemic balance of power. You're just going to do things because they're mandatory, and if they are not mandatory. And I really wish we could go to a society where this is kind of more of a social movement, much more than a government mandated thing.
Léo, Eyal.
Yeah, so I agree with the overall sentiment, and in something more that would worry me a lot if we decided to go with a mandatory app is that this would set a horrible precedent that now government can decide that, oh, this problem is going to be solved by an app. We are going to develop it, and you're going to have to install it. And if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, Carmela.
Can I add to that in that sense, also the academic community should start worrying and stand against veto of Apple, where this goes in the operating system. Oh my God.
Yeah, no argument from me there. I agree completely. So yeah, it would set a precedent which is terrible, and it would give far too much power to, in this case, the state. But as Carmela pointed out, this power was already grabbed by others, which is also not something I'm terribly enthusiastic about. Yep.
I would like to add that, because I agree, and I think this coercion is a terrible way to handle usually most things, and specifically create solidarity in a pandemic. But even if we look at it from the utility point of view, coercion won't work. And we've seen it in Israel. If you have this compulsory surveillance like we had with Shin Bet, people will not use their phone. People, what happens if I go on the train and say, my phone is malfunction. It fell down the stairs. Or I will install a dummy app that will try to help me pass the security person that tried to test it. It will not work. People will fight against it. And the only way that you can try to prevent this fight is if you have very large fines or punishment. And this is a very fast road to terrorism. I think
it's interesting. It's interesting that the three of you are CS people, and the three of you are focused totally on your answer on social answers, which is wonderful and it's encouraging. But I'm wondering, we don't have a kind of a devil advocate on the panel, which is very bad. We have a questions from one of the people here. Let me read it to you. It's from Serge Vaudenay. It says, an app which would notify people at random could achieve the same proof of efficiency as Swiss COVID by spotting 26 people. Why can't we set up a correct and objective efficiency measure? So here we are going to one standard and one size fits all. Eyal, I think you mentioned that. But what do you think? What's your take on that question?
My take on that question is that the question is correct, and the question is very good. Like, what is even the good and correct? Yeah, like we cannot, because I would say so far we're not very sure of that. I said that in my talk, that this is the current working group is about how do we even measure this thing? What is the good way that we can standardize? And again, we had 3 months to design this thing, 5 months, whatever, right? We're still on the process, and I think any input on this is very much appreciated, because I don't have a good answer.
But can we have an objective measure? That's a big question.
That's a big question.
Yeah. I think that even if we can find an objective measure, there is a price that we need to pay in privacy in one way or the other to get this information. And as Carmela mentioned before, we can say we have like great technical solutions like Preo and use Preo with differential privacy and a lot of other measures to try to get the statistics. It will always have a cost in privacy, and it will going to reveal information that people might not want to have. And this is again a trade-off that we need to try to tell ourselves, do we want to have it? We had this discussion in Israel, with this we have with many people, and our goal was to say we need to have a better understanding of the way the app works, because we want to have the arguments to say that we can replace the Shin Bet tool, which is the greater evil in the way that I see it. But it's always a trade-off, and I think that it will be very, very difficult, because the ground truth says, will contact tracing app will be a significant addition to the way that we want to stop the COVID-19 spread. This is something that we're not going to know for several years, no matter how many people are going to get a real notification, yes or not. And it's something that's, I don't know, seems to me like more of a religion than actual, based on actual facts at this point.
Can I add something? That I also think that this is a process that has to also be interdisciplinary, right? As saying what does mean the as CS, the app works, it's very absurd. So this needs to have an epidemiological impact, input, to know what it's the thing that tells them, the guys that know about it. And not only the computational epidemiologists, we're very good at getting numbers, also the anthropological ones that will tell us what about different populations, what about, how do we even measure all of these things? And then our role as computer science, or as I see it at least, is how can we again provide them with means to do this in the less invasive way. As Eyal said, we're gonna have to give up somewhere, but that is something that we can do to help provide the means or ideas to do this in a different way, the same thing as happened with the app. But the answer, I hope that doesn't come from the people in this room.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm totally positive as a social scientist that we can't find a one measure, objective measure, because those contexts are very important, because the social contexts are very important. And it's part actually of how you design the solution and how you design the process itself. So having it, as you said, Eyal, one size that fits all is actually impossible. Leo, you wanted to say something? I mean, you know what, wait for a second, because I think the next question you have something to say about it. I'm taking this guy questions further and saying we have 4 technologies that we're using, right? The DP3T, we have the Magen, the PAC, the Western, the Eastern. Why aren't we collaborating? Leo, you were trying to do something like that. Why aren't they collaborating and creating kind of effective collaboration that instead of inventing the wheel every time?
That's a very good question. So I was not involved in the development of any app. So actually, I'm probably not the man to answer such a question. Also, I think we have to keep in mind that in the specific case of these tracing apps for the COVID, it was very particular in the sense that it was not something that had been in the background in academia that it came time to implement. It's something that had to be invented on the spot and like 3 days ago. So I'm not surprised that different initiatives took place simultaneously in different places and that they did not collaborate together in the first place, because also we were locked at home, so we could not discuss during conferences. So I'm not sure the fact that different groups started working on it and reinventing the wheel multiple times is a greater symptom of a problem we have in academia right now. I think it's really that this time urgency happened and something had to be, it was decided somehow that something had to be developed, and multiple teams started working on this same topic at the same time. And of course, work was duplicated. But I don't think it's something, I don't think there is more to it than that. I think, again, I'm probably the least qualified of the 3 of us to answer that question.
I would like to say that from at least our point of view in Israel, there was collaboration. There was quite a lot. This report, which is a huge collaboration all by itself, Carmela will talk about, but what we did when we started to think about it, when we seen the other teams, we talked with all of the other teams. Basically, Carmela and her student gave us comments and reviews on our work, because we asked them, because we've seen their job. We also talked with Pecht and all of the others. I think there was quite a lot of collaboration, these ideas going back and forth. And I think that, at least from our point of view, the only reason that there is a difference between for example, the district solution and our solution, which they are very similar in many ways, is that I think that there are specific subtleties that are more suitable to Israel than the district solution. But there was a lot of collaboration.
Good to know.
I could say the same thing. I think that actually there was a lot of collaboration between every team, including teams that had opposite positions, and that actually they make each other improve, because we were doing the full academic process at full speed, breaking and fixing, right? And that is how many of these systems improved and got better things. I also think that the fact that there was real reinvention, in this case, it was positive, because we didn't have the time to have peer review. It was actually, to me, a very good reinforcement that other very good cryptographers all around the world, that the pact in the West and the pact in the East, that had very big names, came up with the same solution, right? This is kind of a sign that's the other way of checking. One is peer review, the other one is independent thinking and get to the same solution. Then you can start thinking that this must be actually on the good side of things. Otherwise, not everybody would come up with the same. And I also must say that, again, the end of all of these was not academia or non-collaboration. The end of all of this was, at the end of the day, there has to exist an operative system, and there were only two parties that could have part in this game, and they made a decision. And then there is not any more that can be said.
Yeah, I would like to follow up with the question of Dana Turgeman. She's talking about the accuracy paradox. She's saying this as follows. One of the things that is of most appeal to the target audience is accuracy. However, accuracy is especially hard to assess in decentralized applications. In particular, with decentralized applications, in some countries, authorities are not always informed of contact and cannot assess accuracy at all. Is there a solution to this paradox? Accuracy is one of the most important factors to users, but accuracy is also the hardest one to measure, to assess.
What accuracy are we talking about here? I guess accuracy means I selected contact, and this contact is going to actually develop COVID-19. I'm going to go for this one. I don't know for which one to go, right? And in this sense, in the beginning, I was very stressed about this. Then I discovered that manual contact tracing has a 10 to 15% also, what is called the attack rate, right? That 10-15% of actually identified contact, but also tons of false negatives, because the disease is not that if you're in the same room, you will actually get it. The problem of this is that even a 10% get it. That is huge compared to any other disease that we have seen before. That's what makes COVID. So this accuracy thing, I don't know if we can improve it or not. Going to the other accuracy, the accuracy of Bluetooth, which is not the best that we ever have seen. I mean, that's going to be honest. This thing was never measured, so it's not going to be like, a metric thing. But what we have seen is that it doesn't seem that it's much less accurate than a human saying that was 2 meters from someone for 15 minutes, remembering what he did 2 weeks ago. So I don't know. There is a lot of questions for me here as well, also talking with epidemiologists. It's not that when they said 2 meters, they had 2 meters, and then there is a glass thing that the virus doesn't go beyond that. So there is a lot of questions here, and I don't think that these things are so inaccurate that we should go crazy about how much more. I think that we should go much more crazy in investing on contact tracing and on testing, so that we can actually absorb the number of false positives. And I'd rather have false positives, right, than false negatives kind of things, and give people the support so that they can actually go to quarantine, right? Again, it's about the social much more than on improving the technology. Except that technology has limitations. Nobody should say that this thing is the panacea, and provide the rest that is actually something that is in our hands to make.
Can you elaborate a little bit why you prefer to have false positive more than false negatives in this case?
Because a false positive, if we actually provide a good environment for it, and I'm not saying that I have seen any country having all of my wishes, like having paid leave and having a good way of actually giving you social support to, for instance, take care of your grandmother, that you were the only person taking care of her, and now you have to quarantine. What do we do with her? These kind of things, right? And this kind of, so that people can really go into quarantine very fast, not lose their jobs and not do anything. But we have a lot of testing. Then that is good, because then we are going to catch more cases. What we really need to do is to stop, to take the R coefficient down. We have false negatives. We're just going to be quarantining people, and on top of everything, the R thing is not going to go down. So why are we even doing it?
I would like to add that accuracy is a very complex thing to measure. And we know that, for example, Bluetooth has many issues. It depends if you put your phone in your pocket or hold it in your hand. And we're not going to have something that tells you for 100% this was under 2 meters and above it. And as Carmela mentioned, also the 2 meter comes from some kind of ballistic analysis. But we compare it to other tools. So in Israel, we had we don't know, but we might be able to estimate what is the accuracy of the Shin Bet tool, and what is the accuracy of GPS-based solutions. And in all of this, we feel that Bluetooth is probably better than the rest of them. And you can say, maybe it's not good enough and we shouldn't have it at all. And we should already do manual contact tracing. We need to compare it to this. And we need to compare it to, okay, we have no tool, we have no false positive, but everybody has to quarantine because we need to put in their country under lock because we have too many cases, and this is the only way that we solve it. So there are no, as Carmela said, there are no panacea, but we need to compare the different alternatives and try to figure out what is the best approach.
Leo, you have anything to say, or can I continue to the next question? Go ahead.
Just very quickly, I think this just goes back to the question we had before about how to measure the efficiency of these apps, which is extremely difficult, as we discussed. That's that's the problem here, I think.
Okay, I have a question before going to the questions again, back to the question that are posed. I have a question of my own regarding Google and Apple. So some of you have mentioned their fear of Google and Apple, and I hear you. I'm fighting for years against the monopolistic and power-centric, I would say, biases by those gigantic corporations. But specifically, let me ask you about Google. So the case of Google is very interesting because Google has been involved with the health care industry very heavily in the last few years, creating data sets that are medical data sets, medical record data sets, and other metadata that are related. Should we fear the possible interaction between the data that is right now being collected regarding the COVID-19 contact tracing and the other types of projects that Google has been dealing with regarding the medical world? What do you think? Leo, go ahead.
I wouldn't worry. I'm not too worried about the data they're gathering with these apps, but I'm very worried about the precedent this is setting. They have decided and are acting upon the fact that they can upload a medical device really to all the smartphones. I was going to say their smartphones. They're supposed to belong to us, but it's more complicated as we see. So they can just upload a medical device to all the smartphones, and they could decide to do it again for another purpose. In this case, I'm worried about this, but I'm much more worried about, again, the precedent this is setting. I don't know what the others think.
I'm a moderator, so I'll keep my mouth shut at this point because I have a lot of things to say about this. Sorry, Eyal, go ahead.
The medical issue, I'm not sure that it will be easy or profitable for them to misuse this specific information. But I think that the higher level problem, I find it appalling that basically Google and Apple both use their monopolistic power to coerce governments to do basically what they decided is the right way to go. And I think, and I want to believe that their initial thought was that they want to prevent governments from doing centralized solution and try to do mass surveillance or other things that are considered bad for the citizens. But I'm not sure that this is the choice that Google and Apple need to make. And I think, at least from our point of view, when we have, at least we want to believe, a democratic country, and we wanted to say that we want to give the people in Israel the possibility to choose if they want to use a specific solution that we think was good for them. They told us, no, you're not going to be able to give this option to people. And they actually told us in the meeting, why do you need, for example, GPS location? You already have the Shin Bet that traces everybody. We told them, yes, this is what we want to prevent. This is what we want to replace. But they make the choice. Someone sitting in the Silicon Valley or somewhere else make the choice for large populations, also for the people in the Silicon Valley. And this is something that's very frightening to me, because in some senses, we are moving the power from, at least what we want to feel, the power from the people to a very few number of big companies that can make decisions for us all.
I just wanted to call you about a comment, not a question, of Dr. Ajit Kumar. He says, hi all, while we are discussing various aspects of app to solve pandemic, we should all focus on digital divide, especially in Asian countries like India and others. So yes, and we mentioned the ultra-Orthodox community and also the children community in this case. One of the questions that we do have here is regarding the American case. So it goes like that. We have heard today about the Australian, EU, and Israeli experts and about Australian, European, and Israeli apps. The largest number of cases today is found in the US, however. What contact tech are they using? What lessons are we learning from Americans? Anybody? Any lessons that we're learning from
very
Americans?
bad lessons from Americans.
Go ahead, can you explain?
They have not to do the containment of the pandemic. In terms of contact tracing, so they also had teams doing this, back west and back and east pact. But then once the technology was there, meaning when Google and Apple were able to put this thing in, Europe and Australia were actually the ones being able to create the apps. The fact that you have to integrate with the health system, as I explained in my presentation, means that governments need to do this thing. And no federal government in the United States was really prepared. You can talk with our colleagues there and see how many of them are very desperate. And that's actually what caused the new horror, meaning Google and Apple saying, no worries, we're going to save you again. By putting this thing in the operative system so that nobody has to do anything. We will just, just help you and install it, and we'll just.
So the distributed actually situation in the United States, where you have a federal and then you have states and then you have counties and then you have locational kind of authorities, in fact, that jeopardize the way to fight against the COVID-19.
So the fact that federal governments and also that their health system is more disorganized than in most of European countries, right? It was very hard for many people to really convince. So Google and Apple decided they would only give license to use the libraries to health authorities. Health authorities in the United States were not being able to actually get these things done in any way, not even copying the code of any European country or the Israelis or whomever they wanted. It's not that we didn't put it out there. And then it just didn't, if you talk to them, what they will tell is that there was not really a way of getting this done. And now that has caused another intervention. And what scares me about Google and Apple is that they're becoming the mediators between the health system and the users. And that is extremely problematic in so many senses. And it's not limited to Google.
By the way, Google and Facebook, and we have another 5 big giants, are intermediaries of many other areas, not only this area, which makes it more problematic and complex. In fact, in some cases, they're replacing the government in their way to enforce things, to legislate things, to be arbitrators of content, etc., etc. Leo.
I don't think it's a fragmentation issue in the US, because you could argue that it's the same for us in Europe. You have the European Union, then you have the countries, you have Switzerland, which is in physical Europe, but not within the European Union. And then within the countries, you can have further subdivides. And it's not the issue. So in the US, it's not because they have the federal level and the state level that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's that they don't have anything working anywhere. That is the problem, if I want to be very blunt, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Michael Schurman is asking, go ahead, Eyal.
That's the comment that you mentioned before regarding populations that don't have access to smartphones and what we can do for them. And I think this is an interesting case study for the trade-offs that we have between privacy and what solutions can we have. And here in Israel, we've been talking with people also from the government to try to get hardware devices that can be given to different populations that do not have smartphones. And we of course want to get it to be very cheap because it costs a lot of money. And then one thing that costs a lot of money is even a small screen somewhere that you can get information. And all of the contact tracing scheme that we've talked about here, which are decentralized, you need to notify the users and we need to give them information. We need to allow them to make some kind of choice regarding this information. And if you want to have a very cheap device that just does Bluetooth transmission, you can't have it. And one thing that I feel, both in Israel and outside, is that we're going to have different classes in society, that people that have access to smartphone or technology will be able to get better privacy, but people that don't have the money to do it will get a much worse solution and much more privacy, and they will lose much more privacy in this. This is something, again, I feel that if we want to maintain some kind of social solidarity, we need to find ways to prevent this.
Sorry. One of the people is asking, why not keep data from the application in a statutory body headed by a judge with mandatory deletion after, let's say, after 6 months? Like, I guess, instead of the government, you mean, Michael. I'm going to give my answer. I mean, from a power point of view, from sociological point of view, I don't see any institution, organization, a governmental agency kind of giving away their power, but social scientists.
And also, what would be the advantage of this?
I guess kind of like having a more trust level. Once you see kind of an independent body, in terms of the society, it might increase the trust level.
I don't know. Do we have such a body? I don't think. For the kind of data and the kind of power that this data can provide, if we go for the kind of collecting all of the social and governance.
It's a great question. So I'm thinking, I'm the president of ISOC Israel. So ISOC Israel is considered in Israel as an independent body, and therefore it is responsible on the infrastructure, on the DNS infrastructure. I'm thinking about internationally whether we have something parallel to that, but I'm sure that we can find NGOs that are independent and are highly qualified as high reputed kind of organization. The problem is not this. The problem is that I don't see governments giving away their power and giving away their control of the situation, especially when it comes to the pandemic. Who are they going to blame when it happens? What are they going to do? How are they going to control the process if something happens?
I can give you a concrete example. When we talked about with the Ministry of Health, with the legal department, about getting a server in some kind of third-party entity, might be in the university or in ISOC or any other such organization. They said there is not going to be any way that they were willing to put any information or trust anything outside the Ministry of Health. They said, okay, maybe we can go to another government entity to try to do multi-party computation between two parts of the government. I don't see it happening because there's no will for it, and again, I don't see added value.
Forget it, I muted myself. I have a question. My question is as follows. Google and Apple blocked other competing contract tracing schemes from using their optimized Bluetooth low energy API. What do you think are the consequences of of such an act of blocking the competition? By the way, in other topics, like in content where this is my expertise, you know, when Facebook bought, for example, Instagram and WhatsApp, it actually destroyed totally the different small organization that could compete against Facebook for the long run, not for the short run. But here with the COVID-19, what is such an act? What's the impact of such an act?
I think for one concrete example, in Israel, in Amagen 2, the iPhone X have problem to try to receive Bluetooth notifications, and to send. There are a lot of technical issues. And one solution that we thought that maybe for at least part of those devices that were hard to work with, we're going to still implement the same Google and Apple solution. We're going to simply follow their scheme to try to at least send information to those devices. And if I understood correctly, again, it's a hearsay at that point, legally, the Minister of Health was not allowed to do this, because they're going to use specific IDs that were registered by Google, and they're not allowed to use it. So now, if we want to provide some interoperable solution, it's illegal for us to implement this. And you can really understand what it means for health issues and also for market shares and competition. If there is a third phone company that doesn't want to use Android or Apple, I'm not sure that they are allowed to provide the same solution. So people say, I can't buy this magic third company's devices.
Yeah. Carmela, you want to say something?
Leo, go ahead.
Thanks. For me, I'm not going to go into as practical a direction. What this decision is enacting is that we have entered headfirst into a cyberpunk dystopia. Companies, very few companies, only 2 of them, do not only see all of our communications, now they are also taking charge of our healthcare. This is huge. I see this as a huge power move, and we'll see where we go from here, but I'm not super enthusiastic.
I don't think I have much to add to that. Right? The consequences of this, I mean, we will see, because we will see where this graph ends. I don't think we have seen the end yet.
Do we have a role in this? Do we have a role to fight it back as scientists?
I think that as scientists, we have a role to push our governments to have, which are the ones that actually can.
The government, not necessarily
governments and citizens. I think that both are the ones. Scientists, I mean, we can rise both of them. But what I was going to say that is important to this thing that you have said is that, to me, the difference between, because before they have already done this thing, right? They just had a hearing in the United States about competition, about how slowly, as you said, about Instagram, they slowly get every market and they get to be the one and only ones. But this, for the first time, they have done this publicly. They have done this in a very evident way that is much easier to explain to citizens and to governments what happened. And I think that this is a difference that put us in a different position than before in terms of how to maybe organize this thing, to say how was our role. The fact that they have done this so openly, and that so openly we have the kind of coercion that Eyal is saying, and that this can be seen, it can be tangible in a way that was never before, puts us in a very different position in the terms of now deciding or having actions against this power move than in many of the ones before that we knew they were happening. And Karine, you said you have been studying this, so probably you have a zillion examples where they have become the power. But this one is different to me in that sense, in the sense that they had to do this publicly, and this has never happened before.
Thank you. Thank you. I have small 2 questions, but I'm so eager to ask you if you had, I mean, I don't want to ask you about the limitations of deploying mass, contact tracing application, all this. We're beyond that, but I want to be provocative. Let's think critically for a second in this panel, right? We have 10 minutes. If you had to ask the one question that we might don't have an answer, what would that be? what is the cutting edge question that we kind of confront, and we know that we don't know most of it? What would that be? What do we want to put here on the table so the people who hear us right now, they would say, okay, let's discuss this question. It's a hard question, by the way.
I think, in my opinion, it's something we've discussed before. It's do they work? If we had the answer to that question, then suddenly lots more things would become much clearer. If it turned out that these apps were just the solution to end the pandemic, then okay, let's do that. Absolutely. If it turns out that they're completely useless, then no, let's completely break and forget about this and move on to something else.
So when do we know that it's work? In fact, Sir just wrote in the chat, he says, when is the game over? It's almost the same. The sausage question is almost the same. So when do we stop? When do we know that it worked?
Yeah, that's what we discussed before. That's solving this question. I mean, we need the magical oracle you mentioned to get the answer. I don't know what
Carmela.
the others think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's actually the big question. I mean, the other big question is what we also have touched now, is can we, do we have a role in this big tech versus government, and what are the social moves that can be done, and is there any even that we can, and how to explain to the public these technological moves, because I find it so hard to even get citizens to understand what's going on.
Yeah. And I think I will add mine, I think for the first time as a social scientist, it's very hard to see a kind of I would say a rational choice kind of direction. So it's not if you're doing X plus Y plus Z, you will get, I don't know what. And the Shin Bet, by the way, is the best example, because when we started to use the Shin Bet, Israel was in a good shape. And now we are in the worst shape, and the Shin Bet is still working. So in a way, you're asking yourself, okay, so it doesn't really help. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't. And how come other countries that are not doing any limitations, they're doing much far better than other countries that are having limitation, and vice versa? So it's very hard to see a kind of when you're comparing the 215 countries on a macro scale, it's very harsh and hard to do a kind of a logic analysis to understand what impacts what on a more macro level. One size fits all.
And in that sense, right, the other question we just have said, the hard question is, does it work? The other hard question to me to answer is, what damage has it done? Yeah. Because we don't have, it could be many dimensions, there could be many, because again, to decide it, I also think that whether it worked or not, it also depends on what was the balance that we got at the end.
Yeah.
I think I have a little bit of different question.
Go ahead.
Question is, if we can give a concrete real number to say that this helps in 5 scale out of 10, and it breaks the damage it did regarding privacy is 2 out of 10, does it even matter? Because we say we want to have specific measurements and things, and the way I see the things, how things are handled here in Israel and in many other places in the world, the government's people that are trying to manage this situation, they don't work with the numbers. They have a lot of reason to make different decisions, and most of them are not fact-based. And I think that we are seeing very clearly the fact that science in general, that at least I believe should have had a major role in the way that we decide how to handle this situation, is put aside, and people are politicians are using tuitions or other reasons that they have to make the decisions. And the bigger question is that if we want to have something that is fact-based, that is science-based decision, how do we convince both the general population and the politicians that this is the way to do it? And without it, I think it doesn't matter what answers we're going to give about regarding these applications.
Nice questions, definitely. So I think what I would like to do is we have another 3 minutes, and if each one of you can summarize in one sentence what you want to say about contact tracing, and then I think we'll wrap up and pass it into Or and Benny and Ellie. Carmela, the one sentence of your life.
I really don't think I have more to say about this, I swear.
That's a one sentence. Leo, but you've got an excuse after what you said today. I mean, you're
I just arrived. So I don't have this excuse.
No, you don't.
Although I agree with the sentiment of Carmela, I think we have touched on most of the very important issues surrounding these apps. I think my two main takeaways from this is that this is a reminder that science takes time, which no one had. And many of the issues surrounding contact tracing will boil down to that, be it the terrible implementations of the Australian app or the lack of academic consensus on how to do things, etc. And also, yes, as we mentioned later, that the impacts of this on society are yet to be measured, but the fact that it allowed Apple and Google to become bold enough to make such a power move is, in my opinion, very worrying.
Yeah, your one sentence.
I feel that maybe now the most important thing that we can all do is wear a mask, wash our hands, and keep social distancing.
You sound like our Prime Minister right now.
And whatever we can do, the best tools that we currently have are still the same that we had in 1918, and we still have the same problems to trying to convince people to use them as we had in 1918. And I think that this is part of the larger issues of educating people on the importance of science and fact-based. And let's hope that things will get better.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carmela. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Eyal.
Thank you.
And again, I'm terribly sorry for being cut so many times in my, I just had to reboot, I guess, my Mac. And thank you for the panel. It's been a pleasure. I feel that I was a kind of a minority among the SCS, but it was definitely fascinating that you gave the answers of the social scientists. It's unbelievable. So thank you, everyone. And Ellie and Benny, you can take it from here.
So first of all, thank you very much, all of you, Karine, for managing this panel and the panelists. You can also clap each other. We're sorry that. So thank you very, very much. Just last housekeeping announcement. Tomorrow we start a bit later than usual at 12 Israeli time, which is 11 Central European time with daylight saving time. And again, you can do your own calculations. I think it's 5 a.m. if you happen to be in East Coast, or 2 a.m. if you happen to be West Coast. But I take no responsibility for that. So see you all tomorrow, and tomorrow we start, as I mentioned, at 12. Have a good day.